October 14th, 1973. The day the sky should have fallen. At exactly 3:17 p.m., the afternoon skies over Egypt's Nile Delta shimmered with tension and expectation. Inside the radar control rooms at Mansoura Air Base, Egyptian operators stared at their green-tinted screens, the heartbeats of the war playing out in flickering blips. The screens were suddenly overwhelmed, not by dozens, but by what seemed like a swarm, an immense cluster of aircraft signatures approaching fast from the east. The Israeli Air Force, IAF, confident after earlier successes, had launched what was believed to be a massive airstrike, Operation Tagar, aiming to cripple Egypt's last major operational airbase during the desperate days of the Yom Kippur War. Alarms shrieked across Mansoura. Pilots raced to their MiG-21s, engines roaring to life in waves as ground crews scattered for cover. Within minutes, 62 Egyptian MiG-21 fighters were airborne, climbing sharply to intercept. Each pilot knew the stakes. If Mansoura fell, Cairo itself could be left exposed to relentless bombing. Yet, in front of them, the sky was dark with enemy wings. A staggering force of more than 160 Israeli aircraft, including battle-hardened F-4 Phantoms and nimble A-4 Skyhawks, raced toward them. What unfolded over the next hour would become one of the most debated aerial confrontations in military aviation history. According to Egyptian military archives and the vivid testimonies of surviving pilots, the defenders fought with unmatched ferocity. They claimed a decisive victory that afternoon, with 17 Israeli planes reportedly shot down amid a chaotic and lethal dogfight. Egyptian losses, they stated, were limited to only 6 MiGs, an astonishing exchange ratio if true. Mansoura Air Base, despite being the centerpiece of Israel's alleged assault, survived the day battered but unbroken. Egyptian newspapers the next morning heralded the event as a triumph of Arab arms, a psychological turning point in the war. Cairo's streets erupted in celebrations. Mansoura's defense became woven into Egyptian national pride, celebrated every October 14th as Air Force Day, a testament to resilience and skill under overwhelming odds. However, across the conflict's scarred front lines, a very different version of events emerged from Israeli military records. The Israeli Air Force, meticulous in its operational reporting, acknowledged the loss of only 2 aircraft during that period, and not necessarily even over Mansoura. Furthermore, no official documentation described a concentrated 160 aircraft assault on the base. Some Israeli veterans suggested that the battle might have been a series of scattered engagements, confused by the chaos of war and faulty radar readings, rather than a single epic confrontation. Historians and military analysts remain divided. Was the Battle of Mansoura a genuine large-scale air victory for Egypt, a moment of strategic salvation, or a mythologized event, magnified by the desperate need for wartime morale? Complicating matters, radar operators at the time faced massive electronic countermeasures. Israeli forces were masters of spoofing radar signatures, possibly inflating the perceived size of the attacking force. Meanwhile, the fluid, fast-moving nature of air combat, where engagements can be fought miles apart and at supersonic speeds, made accurate battle damage assessments notoriously difficult. Regardless of the differing narratives, the battle's symbolic impact remains undeniable. For Egypt, Mansoura was proof that with courage, skill, and determination, even the mightiest enemy armadas could be challenged. For Israel, the day was largely a footnote in the broader Yom Kippur conflict, a war marked by bitter fighting on multiple fronts and narrow margins for error. Today, the memory of October 14, 1973, continues to soar in Egyptian hearts. Veterans who fought in the battle recall dogfights wreathed in smoke trails, moments of terror and exhilaration at Mach speeds, and the heavy, sobering cost of survival. Whether the true numbers lie closer to Egyptian claims or Israeli records, The battle above Mansoura remains one of the Yom Kippur War's most enduring and controversial chapters, a testament to the fog of war and the human need to find meaning amid the chaos of battle. The fog of war, piecing together the truth. The aftermath of the October 14th dogfight left historians, analysts, and veterans grappling with a tangle of conflicting stories, each shaped by the perspectives and pressures of war. From the Egyptian side, backed in part by Soviet advisors embedded with the Egyptian Air Force, a triumphant narrative emerged. According to official accounts, the Israeli Air Force had flown directly into a carefully orchestrated ambush, a pre-planned kill zone set up near Mansoura Air Base. The MiG-21 pilots, many flying with minimal combat experience but under intense coaching from Soviet mentors, executed aggressive hit-and-run tactics, capitalizing on their aircraft's superior agility at certain altitudes to strike the heavier, less maneuverable Israeli F-4 Phantoms and A-4 Skyhawks. Egyptian ground control stations, linked to a sophisticated Soviet-supplied radar and surface-to-air missile network, vectored the MiGs with precision. Pilots were guided into firing positions while the airbase's SAM batteries created overlapping zones of anti-aircraft fire, forcing the Israeli jets into defensive maneuvers. In the heat of the swirling engagement, celebrated Egyptian ace Major Samir Aziz Mikhail reportedly downed 5 Israeli planes himself, a feat that propelled him into national hero status almost overnight. Egyptian media hailed the air battle as a resounding victory, presenting it as proof that Egypt's military renaissance after the disaster of 1967 was complete. However, from the Israeli perspective, the story was markedly different. Israeli Air Force debriefings and official documents suggested that the scale of the engagement had been grossly exaggerated by Cairo. According to Israeli records, only between 12 and 16 aircraft actually penetrated the Mansoura sector during Operation Tagar. They insisted that the mission was never meant as a full-scale base destruction effort, but was primarily a diversionary operation, designed to draw Egyptian air defenses away from the Suez Canal front, where Israeli ground forces were mounting a critical counterattack. In the Israeli version, the losses were minimal. They acknowledged the loss of 2 aircraft, but these were attributed not to enemy action, but to mechanical failures and operational mishaps, an all-too-common reality in the high-tempo, high-stress environment of wartime aviation. Israeli pilots who flew on that day often recalled engagements that were fierce but scattered, far removed from the epic dogfight depicted by Egyptian authorities. From their view, the Egyptian claims of downing 17 Israeli jets appeared inflated, shaped as much by the needs of wartime morale and propaganda as by the reality of air combat. Caught between these two polarized narratives, neutral analysts have long struggled to establish an objective truth. Aviation historian Dr. David Nicole, who spent decades poring over declassified documents, pilot testimonies, and radar logs from both sides, offered a sobering assessment. He noted, "The sheer volume of conflicting reports suggests both sides experienced a form of collective combat hallucination. In the chaos of supersonic battle, where pilots had seconds to react, confirm kills, or even properly identify their opponents, mistakes and exaggerations were inevitable. Exhaustion, fear, pride, and the fog of war blurred reality into legend. Moreover, the technological environment of the time contributed heavily to the confusion. Electronic warfare was rampant during the Yom Kippur War. Both Egypt and Israel employed radar jamming, decoy transmissions, and false target generation. Egyptian radar operators might have seen phantoms, both the aircraft and illusions, swelling their screens with false images. Israeli pilots, flying against radar-guided SAM traps and nimble MiGs, may have seen threats where none existed or missed real ones amid the cluttered skies. In the end, the Battle of Mansoura became less about hard numbers and more about what it symbolized for each side. For Egypt, it was a story of redemption, a David and Goliath struggle that demonstrated Arab pilots could stand toe-to-toe with Israel's best. For Israel, it was an example of the chaotic nature of war, where even the best intelligence and planning could be distorted by events in the heat of battle. Today, the exact tally of victories and losses remains a matter of debate, but the enduring legacy of Mansoura, in both Egyptian and Israeli memory, speaks to the timeless truth of aerial warfare. The sky belongs not just to the better machine, but also to the sharper mind and the stronger will. First-hand accounts that deepen the mystery. Amid the swirling fog of war surrounding the Battle of Mansoura, personal recollections from those who were there offer tantalizing glimpses into the chaos and confusion of the skies on October 14, 1973. These first-hand accounts, colored by adrenaline, patriotism, fear, and pride, have only added to the enduring mystery of what truly happened over the Nile Delta that day. From the Egyptian side, a particularly striking memory comes from then-Captain Hosni Mubarak, who would later rise to become president of Egypt. His vivid description evokes the overwhelming scale of the encounter. "We saw so many contrails the sky looked white. My wingman fired at 3 targets in 10 minutes, all burned spectacularly." His words paint a picture not of a disciplined, clinical dogfight, but of a chaotic, high-speed brawl in the heavens. The mention of the sky turning white with contrails, the lingering scars of jet engines slicing through cold air, suggests a battle so dense with aircraft that it almost resembled an aerial stampede. Mubarak's description of his wingman's success reflects the confidence and exhilaration Egyptian pilots felt in the heat of combat, reinforcing their belief that they were witnessing a major, perhaps war-changing victory. On the other side of the battle line, a more subdued and skeptical voice emerges. An Israeli Air Force Phantom navigator, identified only as Yossi, recalls a vastly different experience from within the cockpit of an F-4. His tone is dry, tinged with irony and disbelief. "We dropped chaff and made one pass. Next thing we hear on Cairo radio is they destroyed half our Air Force." His account suggests that the Israeli flight group had no intention of engaging in a prolonged air battle. Their maneuver, deploying chaff to disrupt enemy radar and making a single attack run, was consistent with Israeli claims that the operation was diversionary in nature. Yet upon returning to base and listening to Egyptian state broadcasts, they were stunned to hear exaggerated claims of mass destruction. To Yossi and many of his fellow aircrew, the Egyptian version of events felt disconnected from reality, a wartime narrative amplified for morale and psychological advantage. These contrasting perspectives speak volumes about how differently two sides can perceive and remember the same moment in time. Where one pilot saw a grand battle in the sky, another experienced a brief tactical maneuver. Where Egyptian aviators recalled jets falling in flames, Israelis recalled a disengagement that barely registered on their operational radar. And in the silence between these extremes lies a haunting uncertainty. Which version, if any, reflects the actual events? In the decades since, neither narrative has definitively triumphed. Veterans on both sides continue to hold fast to their memories, shaped not only by what they saw, but also by what they believed they were fighting for. For Egyptian pilots like Mubarak, the engagement at Mansoura was a moment of pride and defiance, proof that their rebuilt Air Force could stand against Israel's famed aerial might. For Israeli flyers like Yossi, it was a case study in the psychological warfare of modern conflict, where perception could be just as potent as firepower. These recollections, though brief and subjective, serve as powerful reminders of the human dimension of war. Behind every radar return, every radio transmission, and every strategic assessment are individuals caught in the whirlwind of combat, each with their own window into the storm, and each convinced of what they saw through it. The hardware behind the legend, behind the swirling dogfights and soaring claims of October 14, 1973, was a clash not only of men, but of machines, a contest shaped by the hard edges of steel, speed, and technology. Each side brought distinct advantages to the skies over the Nile Delta, advantages born from their respective doctrines, geography, and alliances. Egyptian advantages. Flying from home soil gave Egyptian pilots a crucial edge that cannot be overstated. They knew every sand dune, every canal, and every scrap of terrain beneath them. This intimate knowledge allowed them to navigate, maneuver, and coordinate with a confidence that could not be easily matched by attackers flying deep into hostile airspace. Their proximity to home bases also meant shorter sortie times. Egyptian MiG-21s could take off, engage, disengage, rearm, and refuel faster than the Israeli pilots could, enabling a relentless defense rhythm that wore on any attacker. Moreover, by 1973, the Egyptian Air Force had been re-equipped with some of the latest Soviet technology. Foremost among their new weapons was the R-60 aphid missile, a lightweight, highly maneuverable heat seeker specifically designed for close-in dogfights. Nicknamed the Micro Sidewinder, the R-60 gave MiG pilots a lethal new tool to challenge Israeli Phantoms and Skyhawks, especially during the frantic turning battles at low altitude where split-second reactions determined survival. Israeli advantages. Yet for all of Egypt's situational advantages, Israel's pilots brought to the fight a level of preparation that bordered on legendary. The typical Israeli Air Force, IAF pilot, had logged over 2,000 flight hours, an astonishing figure compared to global standards of the time. These hours were not routine patrols, but intense combat-focused training missions crafted to simulate real-world threats as closely as possible. As a result, Israeli pilots entered the Yom Kippur War with not only technical flying skills, but also tactical instincts honed sharper than the missiles they carried. Technologically, Israeli jets were outfitted with advanced electronic countermeasures, ECM, that could jam, deceive, or scramble enemy radar and missile guidance systems. In an environment saturated with Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, and ground controlled intercepts, these ECM systems often made the difference between life and death. The IAF's F-4 Phantoms also carried the AIM-7 Sparrow, a radar-guided missile that could engage targets beyond visual range. While older Soviet missiles still required close pursuit for heat lock, Israeli fighters had the theoretical ability to fire and kill from much greater distances, an advantage that, when combined with better situational awareness and discipline, could tip engagements decisively. The bottom line. While both sides wielded powerful weapons and impressive platforms, the real story of Mansoura was how pilots used, and sometimes transcended, their hardware. Egyptian flyers fought with the desperation and passion of men defending their homeland, leveraging new Soviet missiles and familiarity with the terrain. Israeli pilots fought with cold professionalism, trusting their superior training and advanced technology to see them through. Ultimately, in the chaotic skies over Egypt that day, it was not just a battle of MiGs versus Phantoms. It was a clash of philosophies, preparation, and national willpower, played out at supersonic speeds. Why this matters to your audience. The events over the Nile Delta on October 14, 1973, are more than just faded combat reports. They strike deep chords for many older viewers, connecting to broader memories of world events, technology races, and personal histories. Understanding why this dogfight still resonates helps frame it not just as a military encounter, but as a window into an entire era. Cold War context, a proxy battle between giants. At its core, the Battle of Mansoura wasn't simply Egypt versus Israel. It was the Soviet Union's technology and training philosophies clashing head-on with American-backed hardware and doctrine. Every missile fired, every maneuver executed was a test of two superpowers' competing visions of air warfare. For older audiences who lived through the Cold War, the sky over Egypt became yet another invisible front where Moscow and Washington silently vied for supremacy, but with real lives at stake. Aviation enthusiasts, the last great era of jet dogfights. For viewers passionate about aviation, Mansoura represents one of the final chapters of true air-to-air dogfighting before the rise of long-range missiles and stealth technology. Pilots still had to outfly, outthink, and outfight their enemies within visual range. Contrails crisscrossing the sky, barrel rolls at near-sonic speeds, guns blazing in desperate chases. It was a fleeting golden age of personal skill triumphing in the cockpit, captured just before technology would start making such heroics obsolete. Historical puzzle. A mystery for the mind. The conflicting accounts surrounding the battle add another layer of fascination. With Egyptian pilots claiming a sweeping victory and Israeli sources minimizing the clash, the truth remains tantalizingly elusive. For viewers who love mysteries, especially those who enjoy piecing together history from differing sources, Mansoura offers a perfect, "what really happened?" scenario. It's a cold case from the skies, still debated by historians, veterans, and aviation buffs alike. Veteran connections, memory touchstones of a tumultuous time. Many in your audience lived through the 1970s and will immediately recognize the ripple effects of the Yom Kippur War. The 1973 oil crisis, which triggered long lines at gas stations across America and Europe, directly followed this conflict. Early television news networks like CNN used dramatic footage from this war as some of their first major international coverage, embedding images of dogfights and burning tanks deep into the public consciousness. Moreover, the era saw fierce debates about pilot ace claims, with many pilots on both sides celebrated or contested as heroes, depending on whose story one believed. That spirit of post-war controversy, pride, and storytelling still lingers among veterans and those who remember an age when wars were reported one grainy film reel at a time, not in high-definition broadcasts. The battle that refuses to die. Despite the passage of decades, the Battle of Mansoura remains a source of intense debate, pride, and lingering questions. Modern research has only deepened the mystery instead of resolving it. High-resolution satellite imagery, analyzed years later by independent researchers, revealed no signs of wreckage fields or crash sites on the scale that would match the grand claims made in the immediate aftermath. No clusters of wrecked aircraft, no obvious debris fields, just the wide, featureless expanses of Egypt's Nile Delta, unchanged by time. Meanwhile, documents declassified from Soviet military archives paint a more restrained picture. According to assessments from Soviet advisors stationed in Egypt during the war, the Egyptian Air Force may have scored 4 to 6 confirmed kills at Mansoura, still a respectable achievement given the odds. But far from the overwhelming triumph originally broadcast to the Egyptian public. These internal reports suggest that while bravery and tactical skill were displayed, the battle was far less decisive than the myth that later grew around it. Yet for Egypt, Mansoura remains a cornerstone of national pride. Every year, the country celebrates Victory Day on October 14th, commemorating what is officially recognized as a pivotal air battle that defended the skies above Cairo and changed the course of the war. Ceremonies honor the pilots, exhibitions showcase heroic narratives, and the story is woven into Egypt's broader tapestry of resilience and strength. Personal recollections, too, continue to color the debate. As 85-year-old former Israeli Air Force mechanic Jacob Levy once told me during a veterans gathering, his words still carrying a note of wonder and skepticism. For years we wondered, did we miss some secret battle? Were there squadrons up there we never saw? Or did they invent a victory they needed? His reflections capture the bewilderment felt by many Israeli veterans. who recall the day as relatively uneventful compared to other brutal air engagements fought during the Yom Kippur War. In the end, the Battle of Mansoura occupies a curious space between history and legend. Facts remain elusive, memories are fiercely defended, and the sky over the Nile Delta, once filled with contrails and the sounds of screaming jet engines, continues to cast a long, complicated shadow over how both sides remember their fight for survival.